Okay, folks, you've all been extremely well behaved coming into the room there, and we're almost starting on time, which is a first for SEFF, I think. Those of you who are around the organisation sometime know that we work on from on time, and it can start a little bit later. I suppose just to say as well that hopefully there won't be too much interference. We are expecting approximately another dozen people over the course of the next hour, so they may slide in. Hopefully not too much disruption to the first panel. Okay. So good morning, distinguished guests. My name is Kenny Johnston and I'm Director of SEFF, and it's my privilege to have the role of compere for today's event. I won't at this stage relay thanks for the many people who have made today possible. Mostly through their presence and participation. Comments will follow at the end of the day. But firstly, I would just like to get the house rules out of the way. So can you please turn your phones off or to silent throughout today's proceedings? We have a number of filming operations going on today, so it's important that we have as little interference as possible. And I would also very much ask for your respectful engagement with panellists and with these most sensitive of issues, which I'm very conscious that many in the room carry each and every day of your lives. Can I also say, and I think a number of you have already availed if you've travelled distance this morning, the restroom facilities, you'll to go out of this door, take to right, and then immediately to the right as well, and you'll find the toilet facilities. In the event of a fire alarm going off, as you proceeded in this morning, is where we would go and meet outside. I also wish to introduce Anne, who is within the room here as well. Anne is our clinical lead here within SEFF and is available today to support anyone who feels at any stage that they need to step out. And we have a private room for that purpose. Thank you, Anne. Everybody knows where Anne is. It's important that we do that, we take care of everyone, because these issues are difficult, and I know that some of the testimony that will come from panellists today will be challenging. So please feel able to step out if you're required to do so. Folks, I just want to go quickly through the through the programme, so you have a clear indication of what is happening today. We've allocated for this first panel workshop an hour and 45 minutes, and we anticipate that after the contributions from the speakers, that there will be between 45 minutes and an hour of a questions and answers session. And we do very much encourage that commitment from the floor. This event rests on your involvement, so please don't be shy, don't be well behaved. Everybody here has got broad shoulders, and we're here to discuss important issues and would want your involvement. We then, of course, break for lunch at 12:30 p.m, and there's a 45-minute turnaround in that. And the reason why is because we are working to time this afternoon for the live official UN event, which will be broadcast to this room at 3 p.m, and we'll finish up our seminar today. After lunch, we then have the second panel, which will be a policy discussion, and the title of that panel is A Fair and Honest Approach to Legacy, Building the Foundations for a Just Future. So why are we here today? Why are you here today? Why indeed is SEFF marking International Day of Remembrance and Tribute to Victims of Terrorism? SEFF believes in building collaborative relationships with like-minded organisations and individuals who share our core value system: consistency and opposition to all criminal violence. We have connections built in Spain, and we're blessed that we have Inigo and Ines here this morning. In the US, care of Juliette and an organisation that we share an interest with, but also across the United Kingdom, and a new relationship hopefully that we will build with Darryl and others in the years to come. And also our stretch goes out to Africa in terms of Rwanda. And we will seek to further strengthen these relationships in the years ahead, as well as build new relationships. We are now a fully fledged member of VOTAN, which is the Victims of Terrorism Associations Network, as our COVITE. We consider it extremely important to mark this official day and to be part of a global message which stands against terrorism and which seeks to implore young people not to follow the same pathways taken by their forebears. Today's theme and this year's theme for this day is United by Hope, collective action for victims of terrorism. And I think over the course of today, the word hope is something that you will hear threaded through many of the conversations. In marking this 8th International Day of Remembrance of and tribute to the victims of terrorism, the United Nations have organised a pre-recorded high-level virtual event titled United by Hope, Collective Action for Victims of Terrorism. And this event, as I say, will be broadcast later today. The 2025 theme was inspired by members of VOTAN, and it emphasises the hope that emerges when victims come together to transform pain into purpose. United across regions and nations, cultures and experiences, victims and survivors are offering mutual support, amplifying one another's voices, and driving collective action to raise awareness, to influence policy and ensure their rights and needs are placed at the centre of counter-terrorism efforts. As part of that official message this afternoon, we'll hear from the Secretary-General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, followed by opening remarks from the Under-Secretary-General for the Office of Counter-Terrorism, Vladimir Voronkov. A statement will also follow from the co-chairs of the Group of Friends of Victims of Terrorism and the screening of a VOTAN film, followed by a global minute of silence honouring victims worldwide, and of which we will be able to participate fully ourselves also. Next year, we are extremely hopeful that victims and survivors of terrorism in the context of the Northern Ireland Troubles will feature more centrally within proceedings. Our event today breaks new ground as the first time this day has been formally marked in Northern Ireland and across the United Kingdom. The theme of this morning's Victim Survivor panel dovetails with the official event. The victim's voice in countering violent extremism. The power of argument exists in the lived experiences, dignified actions, and hearts of those who have been so grievously wronged. We have a wonderful panel of 5 speakers who originate from across the international world, and we are blessed to have you join us today, linking also with locally based victims and survivors. There will be many areas covered throughout the panel discussions, including the importance of education and of trying to impact the thought processes of our young people. Can I say especially never so important in this day of technological revolution, when often our information is coming at us through TikTok, Snapchat, in bite-sized amounts which bear little reality to the actual truth of these issues. This afternoon's panel discussion is more so focused upon our local situation and the ongoing challenges in resolving legacy. We are pleased again to have a strong panel, and we are confident of a good and forthright discussion. Critically for the SEFF family, both jurisdictions on this island are represented, and this is crucial going forward. We must have maximum investment from the UK and Irish states on these issues. Both states have a count to make, but they also must work in a genuine spirit of unity to ensure that terrorism is held accountable under any new legacy accord. SEFF's position has been consistent since we were first formed on the 15th of August 1998, a day for this place which will always lay in infamy, the day of the Omagh bombing. We believe in the rule of law and its fair and consistent application. We have never accepted the subversion of our criminal justice system. We are not latecomers to these issues of what flowed from the Legacy and Reconciliation Act. From the point of the Belfast Agreement onwards, we have been very vocal and clear that all of the subversion that was done to appease certain interests was wrong and unjustified. Despite the policy of appeasement that has been rolled out, we have not arrived yet at a place of peace. We are in a place of standoff. And that, friends, is not good enough. We insist that only a fair and honest approach to legacy will build the foundations for a just future. I want at this point recognise important people in the room who are at the back of SEFF in terms of providing us with the financial support to exist as an organisation, and that's the Victims and Survivors Service. I'm delighted that their CEO and a member of the board are present today. I want to thank you for that ongoing relationship. It is much appreciated. And finally, before I hand over to Oliver Wilkinson, chairman of our first panel discussion, and Oliver maybe thought when he was retiring from the Victims and Survivors Service that he maybe had saw the back of ourselves, but he got a phone call some weeks ago and we asked would he do us the honour of coming and chairing today, and true to form, Oliver didn't think twice, he was here. But I want to make reference at this point to someone else in the room, Patrick Gallagher. And Patrick, within the Executive Office, has been a constant for the last 4 years in terms of these issues for victims and survivors. Has overseen huge change within the sector, including the RTN, the Victims' Pension, as it's known in shorthand, TPDPS, and a raft of other issues. And we're sorry that we are losing Patrick to another section of the civil service, but we appreciate his need to accept that opportunity. But Patrick, on behalf of SEFF, and I know this will be shared by our chairman who's here today as well, we want to thank you most sincerely for the very positive way in which you have gone about your work over the last 4 years as a problem solver, as opposed to someone who revelled in the drama of things. You wanted to get things done, and we appreciate that. So folks, I'll conclude by saying, friends, we trust that you will find today's seminar informative, challenging, it will be, but hopefully in a good way, and ultimately beneficial in helping move these discussions forward. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. In introducing this morning's proceedings, I just want to start by making a few opening remarks. Throughout my personal and working life, much like many of you today, this is the problem if you use an iPad as opposed to a piece of paper where you have everything written. Much like most of you today, I have had the painful privilege of meeting with many victims and survivors of the violence related to the conflict in and about Northern Ireland. Alongside this, I, like you, have witnessed how the role of the victim and survivor has evolved within Northern Ireland society. As a child and an adolescent growing up in this place, it was not unusual to see that those who had suffered through acts of terrorism were forced to carry their trauma in silence. Many had to do so because they suspected that the very neighbours they once trusted were somehow implicated in their loss. Others endured isolation because communities who had long valued the traditions such as the wake, with the rituals of sympathy, compassion and solidarity, were prevented by violent organisations from offering their support to neighbours. The experiences of the families of the disappeared perhaps stand as the starkest and most shameful example of such cruelty. In such an environment, victims and survivors, more often than not women, had little choice but to cope alone, raising children who needed stability, managing daily responsibilities while silently struggling with their own trauma and grief. Beyond a prescription from a local GP, there were few other services for them to turn to. And yet, out of that isolation came resilience. Victims and survivors found one another. Through shared cups of tea, kind words, and practical help, small circles of support gradually grew into volunteer-led organisations, in many cases led by those who had endured the greatest loss, but who chose or who were able to rise above their own pain to help others. Over time, while still offering simple personal acts of care and support, these organisations began supplementing this with what we have today as highly professional counselling and other formal support services. And today, we in Northern Ireland are privileged to have a remarkable network of such organisations right across our community. Organisations, support structures, which are, I would suggest, unique to this place and standing in stark contrast to what is available to many other victims and survivors across Europe and across most of the rest of the world. Groups such as Southeast Fermanagh Foundation stand as a proud, respected example of what has been achieved by determined, committed, decent and honourable individuals. In more recent years, I've also been encouraged to witness a shift within the public and statutory sectors in their understanding not just of the needs of victims and survivors, but of their responsibility in the design and delivery of inclusive, victim-centred services. Significantly, as the public and statutory services have more actively engaged with victims and survivors, they have come to recognise that within these communities resides a valuable and in many ways untapped resource of skills, knowledge and expertise that can contribute much to the well-being of the society in which we all live. And with this, a recognition that there is a willingness, indeed a determination on the part of victims and survivors to turn their grief and trauma into purposeful action, not just for the benefit of others who have suffered like they have, but so that together we can build a future society on the foundations of truth and justice, which will endure not just for today, but for the benefit of future generations. But with this recognition comes responsibility. If statutory and public institutions across Northern Ireland, and I would imagine across the 193 member states within the UN, are to draw upon this untapped resource and seriously commit to hear the victim's voice, they themselves must each commit to engaging with victims and survivors not on the basis of good intentions, but in ways which are trauma-informed. Doing this will necessitate hard work, specifically in enshrining the already well-established and recognised trauma-informed principles of safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, empowerment and inclusion into their own daily practice so that victims and survivors see and experience their voice as being properly heard, seriously considered and acted upon, rather than being left to feel patronised at best and at worst further traumatised. On the positive and hopeful side, it's good to see this happening within Northern Ireland at the moment. Again, thanks to organisations like those which Kenny leads. Given all this, it is my hope that today, as we mark the 8th International Day of Remembrance of and tribute to victims of terrorism, this gathering will not only play its part in helping connect victims and survivors across regions, cultures, and experiences so that their individual voice can be amplified, driving collective action to raise awareness, influence policy, and ensure their rights and needs are placed at the centre of peace-building activity. But also that political leaders and those across public and statutory services across all 193 member states of the UN will actively commit to ensuring that alongside this, all who engage with victims and survivors will in future do so based on an awareness of the principles of trauma-informed practice. If this happens, victims and survivors will see and experience the reality of being honoured, reaffirmed, and that their rights as citizens are being properly upheld. Only then, I would suggest, will they truly feel they are placed at the centre of our collective efforts towards creating a society free from the pain and suffering they have unjustly experienced. Thank you. Now to the real work. Can I introduce Inigo and Ines, who are going to speak to us, and I think you also have a little presentation. You're very welcome. Inigo's father, Angel Pascual, was murdered by ETA in 2002. You're very welcome to be with us here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here today with you, and the reason is each one of you. I know that it's difficult to understand that because we haven't met each other in the past, but we are going to understand that at the end of my story. First of all, I want to ask you pardon, to excuse me, because I can hardly manage more than 500, 600 words in English. So translate what my brain is thinking into English is really difficult for me. So you're going to hear a lot of mistakes, grammatical mistakes, maybe some invented words. So excuse me, sorry for that. Yeah, thank you. Well, I am a victim, yes, it's true. And have you ever thought what the victim word means? For me, a victim is someone that don't do something like, for example, a good sportwoman, a good writer, a good scientist. No, the victim just stand there. I mean, a terrorist put a bomb and you were there. A terrorist killed you and the terrorist decided to kill you. So the victim really doesn't do anything, okay? And I always think like in a bad lottery. Imagine during the 80s, ETA, the terrorist Spanish group, killed 80 people per year. And we live in Spain, 46 million people. So this is more or less one between 800,000. So imagine a big boss with 800,000 white balls and one red ball. You could spend all your life trying to get the red one and you never get it. I did. And unfortunately, it was not money or a car. It was a lottery of death, pain, or both. A lot of pain. When I was 17, I was traveling by car with my dad to get the school bus, and a car stopped in front of us. Two terrorists get outside of the car, and another hidden 2 cars before us began to shout to my dad. I was with him. This murder lasted 20 seconds, only 20 seconds. I have no time to say bye-bye to my dad. Not alive, I mean. I say he was a good dad. When he was dead, I say I love it. I love him, excuse me. But my dad had told me something before. If something's happened to me, you have to take care of the family. My family is my mother and 3 sisters. I needed to tell my mother what had happened and let my father there in the car. Please, Ines, can you show us that image? Yeah. Could you make it bigger, that one?
Which one?
No? No? Okay. That's my dad. And I was next to him with his head on my shoulder. And it's the image that I most remember in my life. It took me a long time to recover. During the next 4 years, I never avoid suffering, watching suffering my mom and my sisters. I couldn't study my engineering degree because I read, but I don't remember what I was reading. And at the end of the 4th year, after my dad's death, I tried to suicide, driving on the left side. In Spain, we drive on the right side. Driving on the left side of a mountain road. I met another car, but he escaped on the last second. Imagine what kind of fuck-off coward I was. I spent another 6 years suffering a lot. But, fortunately, 12 years ago, a journalist, a very clever guy, and very good guy, with some young students like Ines, came to my home and asked me to tell my story, because they were writing a book of the 44 deaths of ETA in my region. And I told my story and I cried. After that, a few months after, I told my story in front of 1,000 people in a theater. And I decided to help victims like me. Ines is going to tell you what we do in COVITE, in our organization, very similar, the mirror of SEFF in Spain, and I'll finish my story in a few seconds. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I'll just be quick and I'll let Inigo continue in a second. So, COVITE is a non-profit organization in Spain that helps victims and helps defend their rights to justice, to truth, and dignity, and helps preserve their memory. It was founded in 1998 in the Basque Country, the region most affected by ETA terrorism, together with Navarra, where Inigo lives. So in that moment, a group of nearly 200 families affected by terrorism decided to unite themselves and give a press conference and say their opinion on what the terrorism was doing and how it has affected their lives. And so now we still work a lot in Spain, even though terrorism has ceased, but the way terrorism ended is not a way in which the victims' rights to justice and the truth is defended. Is more centered in the perpetrators and how they are reintegrating society without feeling any remorse for the crimes they have met, and they are in politics now, and they defend the legacy of the terrorism they carried out. And so we try to give a counter narrative by telling the truth of what happened, because what they tell is not the truth. So that's the main work we do. And so this is the human cost of terrorism in Spain. I believe Spain, together with the UK and Northern Ireland, and Ireland is the most hit country in Europe by terrorism. At least 1,450 people were killed, and ETA killed 853 of them, so more than half of it was ETA. And well, in Spain we have some programs for victims to go to the schools to tell their story, and Inigo participates in a lot of those programs, and he tells his story to the students, to the young students. So, and now he will tell his experience in doing that.
Thank you, Ines. Well, to finish my story, 12 years ago I decided to help the victims, to help me, of course. And I began to work for COVITE, and we met all the victims' story, many victims' story, because it took me more than 30 years to talk about what happened to me. Why 30 years to talk about what had happened to me? Because I thought in the past that if I don't speak about that, the problem was not there, the murder was not there, and it's false. To talk about what had happened to a victim is very important and helps the victim. Of course, we need to choose the moment. At the very beginning, I couldn't speak of what happened, but now I think it helps me. What can also we do? I spoke in the European Parliament, in your Parliament, mass media, but what I love most is to talk to young people at school, with children between 15 and 16 years old, and also university students. I told you that I was pleased to be here. And I am pleased to be here because I see in your face, through your eyes, the same things that I see in the students. Empathy, kindness, you understand me. Thank you very much. When I talk to young people, we try to learn something, okay? And we learn 3 words: hope, pardon, and hate. Hope, because after such a difficult life like mine, everyone can recover from everything he suffered. Some of my students have lost their father or mother or are suffering. I give them some hope. Second, hate. My mom is Alzheimer's since 2014, but until there, she never talked to me any word of hate. I can't hate. And to hate doesn't help people. Maybe you think at the beginning, yes, I hate the terrorists, but no. You have to stop this at the beginning, or the hate will grow inside you and is wasting time and makes you worse people. And third, pardon. Pardon is very personal. I know some victims that pardon unconditionally and others that will never pardon. In my case, if the terrorists will ask me for pardon, I will give them. To finish, excuse me, my father gave me a present when I was 15 years old. Someone of my age who had expected a ball, a bicycle, he gave me a poem. This poem was a poem of an English writer, Rudyard Kipling. He was translated to Spanish, so my translation to English again will not be very good. But it says something like, I thought that this poem was written to me, because I have written it many times and I always think it's for me. It says, if you can see all your life destroyed, and with any word or tear, begin it again. Thank you very much.
No doubt people will have questions or comments that they would like to have addressed. Can I just ask you to hold on to those until all of our speakers have spoken, and then we'll have an opportunity for a proper discussion. Can I now invite Denise Mullen to speak to you? Denise is here because at 4 years old, her father, whose name was Dennis, was brutally murdered by the UVF in Moy, County Tyrone. That murder was part of what's seen as the activities of the Glenanne gang. Denise continues to vociferously campaign for justice, truth and accountability for the death of her father. And we're delighted that she has agreed to come and speak to you today. Thank you.
Hi, as I said, I'm Denise Mullen. My father was killed on the 1st of September 1975, and I'm almost afraid to tell you the story because you certainly would need counselling after it. But nevertheless, I was almost 4 years of age. My brother was 13 months old, and gunmen came to our house around 10 p.m. at night, and my father went to the door and he was then shot dead. My mother tried to flee through the rear window in the kitchen, and she was shot up 13 times. Miraculously, she survived. To be honest with you, the UVF or those above them couldn't have picked a worse date to have carried out that atrocity. From the day I went to school, to the primary school, right through to secondary school, that was marred every year because it was the 1st of September. And born into a Catholic household, that meant that you went to Mass for the anniversary of my father. So we lived in Moy. Both my primary and secondary were in Dungannon, 5 miles away. So that meant on the first day of school I wasn't going in until almost 10:30. Going into a new classroom and having to explain that you were late. And bearing in mind, I grew up in an era where there was 2 rulers sellotaped together. You got across the back of your knuckles. There was canes, badly punished for being late to school, all attributed to those that shot my father on the 1st of September. Each year my mother would have got a free calendar with the St. Martin magazine, or the Sacred Heart Messenger, and I looked up as soon as it came in the door to see was there going to be any date, any day in the next couple of years that I was going to not be at school on the 1st of September. Well, sadly to say, that never happened. Life wasn't easy at school. I looked around and I read the panel this morning and I thought to myself, I'm going to be the worst speaker here, because everyone's sitting with degrees and very well educated. I never did any homework in primary school. I never did any homework in secondary school. I came home from school, and as my brother got older, he was the same. We had to light the fire, clean out the fire, make the food. My brother, when he was filling out his form for the pension, of which sadly he's actually been denied, wrote in it and it brought me to tears. Actually, I had to go for a counselling session after it. I think our Denise was 9 years of age when she decided to buy a bag of spuds out of my mother's pension. And she tried making spuds at 9. We lived on tinned tomato soup, beans. It's all I could make from 4 years of age. As you said before, Valium. My mother was maxed out on Valium and any other potion of medication that she was given. If my mother woke up in the middle of the night because she woke up for some reason, life was hell. We were put out of the house. Maybe no shoes on us. Grabbed whatever we could. Walked maybe seven miles to my mother's friend's house, many's and many's a night. Only for her, we would probably have ended up in care. going on throughout those years, I was 10 before I actually told anyone what I saw that night, because my home environment wasn't the sort of thing that I could say to my mother. I actually witnessed that at night. I actually sat there with my father. I can remember Dr. Gosh coming first. I can remember Father McKeever coming next. I can remember the RUC coming. I can remember the Army coming, and I can remember the ambulance service coming. I spent many years being tormented by seeing the ambulance service, of which my father worked for, lined up against the ambulance. I still see their faces. There was 5 of them. I see the 4th man constantly, many a day, in my thoughts, trying to wave at me. Anyhow, to move on for that, I was 10 years of age when I told somebody. And it was only by sheer accident that I told somebody. Some of you may remember the music service came into the school, and you were assessed if you could play an instrument. And miraculously, I was assessed and I got to play the violin. And the education service provided me with a beautiful violin, and I was felt privileged to be able to get out of the class. I think I was only one in my class. Bearing in mind, there was 34 children and there was 2 classes of each, so out of that 34, I was the one that was playing the violin. But that went on from about P5, so it was P6, so I didn't even have the full 2 years playing the violin. And my mother took a psychotic episode because I was in the living room playing the violin, and I suppose the noise was doing her head in. And she took and she smashed that violin to pieces. I had to go into school the next day with that and face the music teacher, which was Mrs. Morley. She would have known nothing about my background, nor did anyone else. It was only in later years, whenever I joined Facebook, etc., that I had fellow pupils in my class messaging me, "I never knew that your father was murdered," because we didn't talk about it. It was almost dirty. You know, don't talk about it because, you know, it just wasn't done. But by me going in with a broken violin, I was in a nun's school, she called in Sister Martin. She quickly took me away and took the violin away and brought me into the classroom to then Mrs. Singleton. And she asked me what had happened, and I told her. And I told her what I saw that night. That was the last of it. There was no counselling services. It was a Good Friday Agreement that brought about the counselling services. Counselling for me started when my first son was born. He's now 24, almost 25. And I spent the first few months that he was born panicking. How did I remember? I couldn't remember. I had shown my brother how to tie his shoelaces. I'd taken the staplers off the bicycle myself, because there was no man in the house. And I'd learned him how to ride his bicycle. I was tormented by the fact, how could I teach my son how to do these things? And I eventually spoke to somebody about that, and they got me help. And for that, I thank a lady called Dr. Eileen O'Kane. I'm not sure, she's probably retired now. And I had a treatment with her called craniosacrology. And after weeks and weeks and weeks of going to her, she said to me, "Have you an item of clothing in the house that you're holding on to from you were a child?" And I said, "I did." And it was a lovely crocheted, when I was about 4, shawl. And it in itself, at the start, had a happy memory, but in hindsight, it turned out to be a terrible memory. And she said, "Would you be prepared to get rid of that?" And I said, "Well, I always liked it, and I'm growing up. It was so small, I'd have wrapped it around my dolls, and etc., etc. And she said, "Well, I want you to think about getting rid of that." So I went home, it was in the drawer, and I thought, yeah, I'm just going to get rid of this. And from I got rid of that shawl, my life has been in a different place. So I guess I could go on about several terrible things that has happened. I did manage to get 8 GCSEs. I did my GCSEs, my mother wasn't even aware I was doing them. Unlike my brother, he was paid to make sure he got the 11 plus. He got extra maths tuition while he was at the academy. My mother by that stage had come off her tablets, and she'd said to me actually in the car one day, he was first year at the academy, I'm going to come off these tablets, so I'm not going to be in a great place for the next couple of months, so I really need you to work with me in this. And I thought, how much more of this can I take? I have looked after my mother from I was 4 years of age. I continue to look after my mother, but I'll go on to that. So I did the GCSEs, and actually I had the results a couple of days, and I plucked up the courage to say to my mother, I've actually, because it was the first year of GCSEs, 1988, I did my GCSEs, and I'd like to go transfer to the academy to do A-levels. My mother went off on one. You're not, there's no chance. I can't if you're going on doing A-levels, going on to university. I need you in the house. My life became centred around my mother and her needs. And yes, I've been resentful for that. Part of me is still resentful. Unfortunately, my mother came to live with me. Well, that was a good thing. About 12 years ago. And she came 12 years ago because I actually took cancer in my stomach, and I've had a few operations since that. So I had her for 10 years, and in that 10 years she was starting to go into dementia, etc., etc. And 2 years ago I basically could take no more. It was either my mother going to a home, or I would have to go to, which locally would be St Luke's or Bluestone. So the decision was taken that my mother would, with my brother and I, that she would have to go into a home. Since the day and hour my mother went into the home, she's been caught up in a time warp of, because she's in a single room, and people that are in uniforms, and if she's taken any sort of, maybe ambulance services come for her, my mother would get down on the ground and start screaming. She thinks she's in jail. I didn't shoot him, I didn't shoot him. This is a regular occurrence for my mother. She thinks that she's in jail for shooting her own husband. And when that happens, we're sent for. And trying to convince my mother that she's not in jail is impossible. She thinks if, when she has to go to hospital for some sort of treatment in this ambulance, that they're taking her to another wing. My mother's actually went in hunger strike for 3 days in the nursing home because she thinks that she's in jail for shooting her husband. Thankfully, my cousin's a GP, her brother's daughter, and she would help my mother out a good bit and talking to her, etc. But my mother now, 2 years on from going into the nursing home, has actually lost that. She can't talk. She's eating period food and unable to walk. She did, however, when she came off the Valium, go back and resume her nursing career, and was actually very good at her job. But I just sailed through in life. And I'm glad my brother went to university. I did have serious hang-ups about it, and I will confess that I did speak to the counsellor on several occasions about that, to try and get rid of that feeling of resentment towards my family for not affording me the opportunity to progress my educational needs. I guess I should say other things that affected us as a victim and survivor, and I'm aware that these are sort of things that have happened right across the board, regardless of what religion they were born into, because I've talked to so many people, and I like to think that I have a sincere understanding of how others felt. For 44 years my mother was unable to go back to the grave, and it was only whenever I became a counsellor I knew how the system worked. I went to Armagh Council and Dungannon Council, and was able to have my father's remains repatriated to the Moy, because my mother was adamant that she would not be buried in college land. The reason for that being because of the suddenness of my father's murder. His extended family, as in cousins, etc., because his mother lived in England and as did his sister, took over where things would be buried. Obviously my mother wasn't in the frame of mind, so my father ended up being buried in an extended family plot, and obviously, as we know, that's never going to work out, because there was no row or anything, don't get me wrong, but there was always going to be those family members going into that plot, which meant there would be no room for my mother. So ideally my mother wanted to be buried with my father, but not there. So I undertook a process of sorting that out, I didn't tell my mother, I didn't tell my brother until it was done. And I said to them, get ready for 12 o'clock. The undertaker taking my father's remains to his funeral parlour, and we had just a graveside service with the priest, and it was just the three of us and the priest. That was great for my mother, because up until she went into the nursing home, she was able to go to that grave. Likewise, it was my brother, because he hadn't been back either. I mean, after all, he too is traumatised. But about 8 years ago, the man that shot my father's, Garfield Beatty, stopped me on the roadside. I had absolutely no idea who he was. I knew what he looked like. I didn't know what he looked like. I knew the names of the perpetrators, but I didn't know what he looked like. And I was a local councillor at the time, so this man had hailed me over to his car. And like you would normally do, I guess it's a thing, I just shook hands with him, and he told me his name was Jared Beatty. And I said, where are you from, Jared? And he said, Annaghmore. So I knew if it had been Annaghmore, Coal Island, that was within my area, but there's also an Annaghmore, Portadown, which wouldn't be. And I said, which Annaghmore? Are you Coal Island or Portadown? And he said, Portadown. And I immediately knew his name wasn't Jared Beatty. I said to him, your name's Garfield Beatty. And even as I'm telling you now, there's like a heat in my hand, because for weeks and months and days I had my hand scrubbed off myself. I still have that feeling that I shook that man's hand. But anyhow, he told me that he wanted to talk to me, and he'd wanted to talk to me for a long time. He gave me his phone number, he gave me his address. That was a Tuesday. Obviously, I wasn't going home to tell my mother or anyone else. By this time, I was separated, and no surprise, because, you know, everything I've been through. But my sons, I didn't tell them either. And on the Friday, I took the head staggers and I went to his door. And I spent 3 hours in that man's house, sitting opposite him. He offered me no forgiveness, and I wasn't in a place to give him forgiveness. As I said, he said to me, I can't offer you forgiveness. And I said to him, I'm not in a position to give you forgiveness. There's only one person can give you forgiveness, and that's God. And he was okay with that. And he asked me, what is it you want to know? And I said, just start from the start, Garfield. You know, your childhood, etc., etc. So that was fair enough. He gave me all the pieces of the jigsaw into how my father and mother's name actually became to be on a hit list. And apparently they'd been on a hit list from 73 to 75. And in that period, there was 10 on this list. My parents never went, they always went 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But it was after a killing of a man in early August, my parents went to number 1, and there they remained until the 1st of September. Garfield gave me all the pieces of the jigsaw except the name of what I need. Today I'm actively seeking accountability, not just for myself, but others. Regardless whether you're Protestant, Catholic, whatever, we all need accountability. We need who decided to kill our loved ones. I'm through with Garfield, Power, the other 2 involved in my father's murder. They're way down the chain for me. I want those that decided who was going to kill my mother and father. And I'm sure, like yourselves around the room, I'd like to think that it's accountability for any victims and survivors here that you're after. Garfield means nothing to me. He actually went on to send me a death threat about 4 years ago. At the time I didn't know, actually it's 5 years ago now, in October. I didn't know who had sent it when I opened it. To be honest with you, I was sitting in the car, the postman handed me in the post. Opened it, thought, good God. Legs started to shake, my hands started to shake. My mother was sitting in the living room. My son had just come back from taking him to school. He was in P7. Connor. He'd have been due to sit the transfer test in November. For a whole week, the first week of October, we had police protection going to school, coming home from school. My son started to take episodes in school of throwing chairs about, kicking chairs about. This was totally unnatural for my son. Anyhow, he didn't do the transfer test. So not alone have the effects of the 1st of September 1975 affected me, they've also affected my children. Transgenerational trauma is as huge a thing as the trauma I've experienced in 50 odd years. So I'd like to see more done about that. My son hasn't had any counselling because he wouldn't go. I've asked him to go. My mother spent the 10 years that she lived with me, as I say, day in, day out, my 2 children. At the dinner table I had to say, "Mother, that's enough." Every conversation was about dinner. I'm coming for dinner. Everything about it, every gory detail my children have heard. I now have a 24-year-old that, shall we say, the girl that helps me in the house lifted 10 bottles of Buckfast out of his room. I don't know where it's going to end up. I like to think I'm a good mother, but the troubles, they've harmed us so badly. I don't know really what else to say, but please avail of counselling afterwards. Thank you.
At the start of my comments, I used the term painful privilege. I'm sure after hearing our first 2 guests, you, like me, are very conscious of the sensitivity and perhaps for some the sacredness of the space that we're currently in. Can I now ask Darren Frost to come and speak to you? Darren is a terror survivor, campaigner and justice reform advocate. He is originally from South Africa but has been living here in the UK since 2005. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for having me here. Let me make sure, yes, I know which way this clicker works. Well, firstly, I wanted to thank Kenny and SEFF for inviting me here, and Kenny for that overview of the work that you do. Oliver, learning about your probation background and stuff, you'll see that we've got a lot in common there. I also wanted to thank Inigo and Denise for those really heartfelt presentations. I think I'm quite emotional and touched after hearing that. So, hearing how you worried about university degrees, and then I think we can all understand how trauma-informed care is so important, because when you say that and then you tell your story, we can all feel how personal that is and how you've lost opportunities because of the things you've experienced. I think it also shows us how an example of terror isn't a single incident, but a lifelong experience that goes on with you. It doesn't just stop then. So, why am I here? A South African in Ireland, and it's got nothing to do with rugby. Well, the whole experience, and there was something that you said, Kenny, about transforming pain into purpose. And I think my whole life, without realizing it, that's what's led me onto this path where I'm here. So I'm going to share with you guys a little bit about my own journey, my own path, and at the end I'm going to make you suffer through a poem of my own, following on from Inigo inspiring me to do a poem. So why am I here? Well, this is the reason I'm here. In 2019 I tackled a terrorist on London Bridge. But before I get to that, I want to go through a context of what led me to be there. So I grew up in South Africa, and that's me in the top right corner, looking the wrong way. A bit of an irritating child, I was told. I always used to ask, but why? Why is that happening? But why? But why? I was a bit of a daydreamer, and I still am to some extent. But I grew up in South Africa, and people ask me, what was that like? Well, I grew up in a time very different to now, and it was a divided country where I grew up on the white side of privilege. We had a really divided country where people were classed on the color of their skin, not the person that they are. And even at a young age, I witnessed this. But I didn't really see color. I saw people. And this is what apartheid looked like in reality. It meant you didn't have access to the same things. Education. You didn't get to go where other people went. After 8 o'clock at night, wherever you went was all white, because black people weren't allowed to be out. The only black faces I saw in my town were the ones serving me. So I had a real challenging upbringing with trying to understand why was it this way. And our government said that that is the way that it was right. And they managed that control by dehumanizing the others. The black people were called kafirs, which comes from an Arabic word, kafar, which was non-believer. So they were called kafirs, which is a horrendous phrase because it meant they were non-believers. Why non-believers? Well, the apartheid regime called them non-believers because they said that they were not human. They can't believe in God. They are like animals. And that's how you can treat people subhumanely, is by labeling them as different. And so I had this recognition that something wasn't right. And we had servants. Domestic workers was the big change after the fall of apartheid, was they no longer servants but domestic workers, and they had rights, and all this conflicting things happened in our society. We had domestic workers, but ours, Frida, was more like a mother to me. She made my sandwiches, she showed me care, she looked after me, and she was graciously allowed to have her daughter stay with us. But her son, my age, wasn't allowed to stay there. He had to stay in the township. But on school holidays, he would come back and come into our white neighborhood and stay with us. And him and I used to play all the time, and this continued till I was about 9 years old, when he didn't come anymore. And the reason he didn't come was because he committed suicide. Now this was shocking to me, living my life. Why would someone take their own life at such a young age? And it made me start to realize and look at things from other people's perspective. How horrible must his life have been that he chose to take his own life? So for me, that was a stage of learning. I've got my slides here so I can remember what I was going through. So for me, that was a stage of learning and understanding. And I was fortunate enough. I had challenges at home. I was a bit of a problem child because I kept asking why and not accepting things as they were. And eventually I was put into boarding school. I absolutely hated boarding school. It wasn't a private school, it was a state school. It was really difficult. But what I actually learned was a lot of lessons about justice and fairness. And although it was tough for all of us. And we were equals. And although the first year was all white students, the fall of apartheid meant that we started getting black students in. And what we found was they were other boys with the same challenges. They were exactly like us, with same difficulties, same hopes, dreams, and desires. It wasn't the color of their skin that defined them, but who they were. And I went to a school where we learned to be brothers. And through that brotherhood, we found a real strength, and I see that strength coming through in the South African rugby when you don't just tick a box of diversity, but when you actually integrate, there is such strength in learning that. Fast forward a few years, and I moved over to the United Kingdom, and I got a job in the prison service. So I was working in probation in Northampton. I got a job there, and my whole world changed because I saw a new disadvantaged group, and they weren't black, but they were disadvantaged through social opportunity and life experience. And these were people going into prisons and the justice system. And I was expecting to meet monsters. I was expecting to meet horrible humans, the ones we see in the media, murderers out there skulking about. But one of my experiences was I was in an open prison, and I arrived and a gentleman met me at the gate and he walked me through, and I asked him, "How long have you been working here?" He laughed at me. He's like, "I'm a prisoner, mate." And that was my first experience of an open prison. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. Later in that day, I was about 27 years old, I met another man, and he was talking to me about his job in prison. And his job was to work in a factory in the prison. And he was so enthusiastic about this. I asked him a few questions, and he was like 30 years old, and he's like, "This experience in this factory in the prison is going to give me the experience to get a job when I'm out." And I was thinking, why so excited about a factory job? And I was like, "Well, what did you do before you came to prison?" And we'd been talking for about 15 minutes, and I had assessed he's a nice guy, well-spoken, and he's like, "I didn't do anything." And I was like, "Yeah, but you must have done something before you came to prison." And he's like, "Well, I went to prison for murder at 18. And that made me consider my own preconceptions of what and who is a murderer. And I had to try and break down my own preconceptions of what did that mean. So that was a bit of a journey into learning about that and seeing people as people and understanding what their issues were. And I had the opportunity for many years working across prisons and to do surveys with prisoners and with staff, and seeing two opposite groups and hearing their complaints and understanding that they're all human, similar needs that they're wanting, but they're just not able to communicate. Anyway, this led me to an event which was in London in 2019 on London Bridge at Fishmongers Hall, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And I took this photo early on, and the first person to arrive there was someone who would end up changing my life. Rather than telling you what happened now, I'm going to explain that in the poem, so please bear with me. But following this incident, I was awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal, and I'm here to talk a little bit about how we can use these issues of trauma and these experiences to change things. The Americans, amazingly, talk about something very different to just post-traumatic stress, but they talk about post-traumatic growth. And it might seem counterintuitive, but actually, people who've experienced this pain become resilient. They become strong. They change, they adapt, they still finish their GCSEs against all the odds. Amazing people who get this drive to change things for the better. They become local councillors. They try and improve things for their communities. They try and campaign in schools for understanding. Victims become people who get these superpowers to go on beyond what they may have otherwise. So, what have we done? Sorry, just wondering if I can go to the next slide. Sure. Oh, no problem. There we go. So on that day in London Bridge, I was assisted by prisoners. The Ministry of Justice offered me an MOJ award for my actions that day, and I said I'd be humbled and honoured, but only if they rewarded the prisoners who risked their lives too. So they retracted that offer of an award. But this man on the far right, he had been convicted of murder, but on that day he helped me stop someone who was hell-bent on creating chaos and taking more lives. And him and I have set up a small social enterprise called Own Merit, and we house prison leavers now who would otherwise have been homeless. And we've housed 24 men over the last 2.5 years, totally unfunded. And those are two of our residents that have come through, and Ben on the left here has now become our house manager. He's also become a peer mentor, and he now works full-time helping other young men change their lives around. So the ripple effect has begun. But we also do campaigning. There's an organisation in the UK called Survivors Against Terrorism. And what I want to say is that the victims are not weak. It's quite the opposite. Their voices are strong. And when they come together, they can achieve remarkable things. I'm on the sofa there next to Fegan Murray. Her son, Martin Hett, was killed at the Manchester Arena bombing. And she, as a mother, quit her job and campaigned tirelessly to change the way that venues are managed across the UK and how we assess safety, because there was no regulation about how an establishment should assess their own safety. She's campaigned and campaigned for years, and she's changing the law. They are putting in new laws around this. And beside her, Brendan Cox, his wife, Jo Cox, was a murdered MP, and he set up Survivors Against Terror, and we are changing the way that things are happening. We have, before there wasn't any rights in the UK for victims of terrorism, but through our campaigning and going on TV and sharing the victims' voices, we've got the government to agree on a survivors' charter, set structures and agreements of the care and support that survivors and victims of terrorism will receive going forward. So there is a lot of power in the voices of victims, and I thank all of those for being brave enough to come and share their stories. Now, the part that I've been dreading is sharing a poem, and I am not a poet, so please bear with me. When filled with terror, your knees go weak. You can hardly speak. The mind starts reeling while you stood there, dealing. Man, stocky chap, in black, peaked cap and a heavy-set brow. Blades, 8 inches, not one, but 2, in both hands, duct-taped. Behind him, so still, a woman, no breathing. Stop, this is real. A dream, a drama, a nightmare, you're right there. Main character, his life and yours colliding. Choice? What choice? You try, or people die. 2 blades, 1 chance for survival. Chess to the death. With ivory in hand, I think, I plan. He looks me in the eye and makes his move. Got a bomb. When the coppers show, I'll let it blow. Glance down. Fuck me. There it is. Deep breath. Mind reeling. 2 blades, 1 bomb, no chance. But you try, or more people die. I digress. Let's assess. A few down here, some injured needing care. 100 or more upstairs, unawares. What do you do when the boogeyman comes for you? Faith is found in fellow men, unlikely heroes, immigrants and prisoners offering their lives. Uncomfortable for those in power to recognize these are the people we told to despise, immigrants and prisoners, heroes. 2 blades, 1 bomb, 4 lives willing sacrifice, slim chance. We stood, we fought, we bled, and we drove him out. On London Bridge Theatre for the world to see, we took him down, the police await. His voice echoes. When they show, I'll let it blow. Move away, 3 police armed and shout, move away. I won't release his wrist, you see. 2 blades, 1 bomb, and a trigger. To release would be insanity. I held on and on. Bomb in face, guns at head. I held on and on. What they don't see, I'm doing this for them, not me. To release his hands. Insanity. His move he makes. I've got a bomb. Police voice breaks. Panic, fear, 3 guns, 2 knives, 1 bomb, 1 trigger, no chance, no hope. Checkmate. Blood is shed, and a big explosion inside my head. 3 lives taken, 2 brilliant, 1 great loss. Thank you very much.
there you are, and he says he isn't a poet. And I want to introduce Juliette Scauso. Her father was a firefighter, Denise, who was killed in the line of duty in September the 11th. And in the years since that, she has become an active advocate for accountability and justice on behalf of the 9/11 victims. You're very welcome.
Hi everyone. First, I want to thank Kenny for having me come here. And I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today on behalf of the countless victims of terrorism, and in particular, the families affected by the September 11th attacks. On the evening of September 10th, 2001, thousands of people went to sleep. Office workers, airline passengers, firefighters, police officers, all preparing for what should have been just another Tuesday morning. They were ordinary people with hopes and dreams, with families who loved them, and preferences like the way they drank their coffee in the morning. But by 10:30 a.m. on that bright blue Tuesday morning, 2,977 lives had been lost. Among them was my father, Dennis Scauso, a firefighter with the FDNY's Elite Hazardous Materials Company 1. He perished alongside 18 of his brothers from the same firehouse, leaving behind over 50 children in that one firehouse alone without fathers. My father was no stranger to risk. As a 12-year FDNY veteran, he had responded to the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993 and was one of the only firefighters trained to recalibrate the city's chemical detection meters. His nickname was MacGyver. He was a skilled mechanic, a pilot, a lover of jazz and Frank Sinatra, an animal rescuer. He had a pet raccoon, and above all, a devoted husband and a dedicated father of 4. He was the kind of man who made us Mickey Mouse pancakes in the morning and fixed our broken toys, even if that meant reattaching Barbie's head with duct tape. And he always had time for others. He would truly give you the shirt off his back. On September 11th, he wasn't originally scheduled to be working. He had traded shifts to earn some overtime so that he could finally take my mother on the Hawaiian honeymoon that they had always dreamed of. After the first plane hit the North Tower, Hazmat 1 responded immediately, running towards the chaos to aid in the evacuation efforts. The last person to see my father alive said that he suited up and ran into the towers as if he was heading into the heat of battle to slay a dragon. The trauma of losing a parent at such a young age is a wound that never fully heals. That morning, I was a child playing on the floor of my grandparents' living room when the news on the TV replaced my cartoons. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew something was very wrong. The silence in the room was heavy. I watched as the North Tower burned, the South Tower as it was hit by the second plane, and as they both collapsed. And in that moment, life as I knew it had changed forever. My father died a hero. His remains were never found. The only piece of him returned to us was his mangled fire helmet. Our family, like so many others, was left with not just the absence of a loved one, but the absence of closure. To this day, the process of identifying 9/11 remains is ongoing. Our grieving process was never private. In the days and months after, grief in our home was compounded by the public nature of our loss. The personal became political. Reporters, cameras, and politicians hovered as we tried to commemorate our loved ones. With the constant media attention surrounding 9/11, it often appeared to the public as though the families were being fully taken care of, that there was endless support for us. But that perception was an illusion. Behind the headlines and ceremonies, the grief and trauma never ended. It doesn't fade when the cameras turn away. It tears through every part of your life, stripping away a normal childhood, reshaping your family, your future, your sense of self. Every anniversary became a media spectacle. And even now, the place where my father took his last breath is both a sacred memorial and a tourist attraction. The graves of our families are now selfies for strangers. And the memorials, though beautiful, can never bring us the peace of true justice or accountability. In the years since, memorialization has come in many forms: art installations, museum exhibits, hometown memorials, and annual ceremonies. The street where my parents both grew up is now named after my father. His name is etched into memorials and flags around the world, including many pubs in Ireland. These efforts are meaningful, and I'm so grateful for these tributes, but they cannot replace the life we lost or address the systemic failures that victims and survivors continue to face. Despite the motto of 9/11 being never forget, victims and survivors have often been left to fend for themselves. Healthcare for first responders exposed to the toxic debris at Ground Zero have had to be fought for in Congress again and again and again. Compensation programs have been mired in bureaucracy. 9/11 victims and families like mine have spent years in legal battles trying to hold accountable those who helped facilitate the attacks. Our fight for justice in the US courts has been long and exhausting, and we've had to fight for every inch. And as far as I was aware, never forget didn't come with an expiration date. In 2021, the declassification of FBI documents confirmed what many of us had long believed, that over a dozen Saudi government officials, including a Saudi intelligence operative, were involved in facilitating the attacks. Yet, more than 2 decades on, there has been no meaningful accountability. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia continues to operate with complete impunity, not only avoiding justice, but in many cases being courted as a business partner on US soil. That is an insult to the memory of my father and to every victim of 9/11. Governments are quick to mourn victims publicly, but far slower to actually deliver the sustained support that victims and their families need in private. This is not just a failure of policy, it's a failure of empathy. We should not need to be extraordinary to access support. We should not need to relive our trauma to be believed or to be helped. Victims and survivors must be heard, not only on memorial stages, but in the rooms where decisions are made. They should be included in policy making. They should be protected from re-traumatization. They must be provided with the justice and dignity that they so rightly deserve. People who have not experienced trauma and grief firsthand simply cannot truly understand its depth or its permanence. Grief is not a process to be completed, nor is it a wound that fully heals. A few years ago, a peer asked me if I was over it already, or if I was done with the grieving process regarding my father. That question really struck me, not because it was malicious, but because it revealed how many people view loss as something linear, with a clear start and finish. The reality is that grief evolves, but it never disappears. There's a quote that I have always loved by an author named Anne Lamott about loss. She says, "They live forever in your broken heart that doesn't seal back up, and you come through. It's like having a broken leg that never heals perfectly. That still hurts when the weather gets cold, but you learn to dance with the limp." That is exactly what losing my father has been like, an ever-present ache woven into my life. You learn to live with it, you even find moments of joy again, but you carry it always, because the person you lost remains a part of you. This kind of loss changes you at your very core. It reshapes the way you see the world, the way you connect with others, and the way you measure what truly matters. I would not be the same person today if this had not happened to me. My priorities, my values, even my decision to enter a career in medicine have all been shaped by the understanding that life is so very fragile and time with the people that we love is never guaranteed. Grief has made me more compassionate, but also less tolerant of injustice. It has given me resilience, but it has also etched into me a constant awareness of absence. I try to live by my father's example of compassion, service, and integrity, but I also carry the pain of a life permanently altered. I've had graduations, birthdays, moved abroad, and pursued my dream of becoming a doctor without his guidance or pride. Milestones are always bittersweet, joy tinged with the ache of what's missing. With every new terrorist attack in the world, with every war, and what is currently happening in Gaza, complex emotions and trauma are brought back to the surface for those of us who have lived through such loss. We understand that new victims are being created every day. Families who will now walk the same painful road that we have walked. This is why remembrance must also be a call to prevention. We must do everything in our power to stop future acts of terrorism, to protect innocent lives, and to spare others from the lifelong grief and injustice that we continue to endure. If we truly wish to honor those lost to terrorism, we must ensure that their families are supported, that their suffering is not politicized, and that their deaths are not dismissed. That is how we make never forget more than just a phrase. That is how we turn remembrance into a legacy worthy of those that we have lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliette. Now our last speaker. I want to introduce Louie Johnston. Louie's father, David, was murdered with his friend and colleague, John Graham, on the 16th of June 1997 by the Provisional IRA. They were both RUC GC officers. Louie, at that time, was aged 7. Like many who have been impacted by terrorism, he and his family had a choice to make. Did they allow the violence that they had suffered define them, or did they move in a much more positive direction? He'll tell you something about that now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for you for being here, because for me these issues are very important. It's important that we have a day like today, so thank you for your participation in that, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this event. Before I talk about the death of my father, I would like to talk to you about his life. And my dad was David Andrew Johnston. He was born on the 12th of February 1967. And born into a family locally here in Lisburn in the town. Fast forward a few years, he went to Lisnagarvey High School, again in this town of Lisburn. And in his spare time, he, at that stage, I can't relate to this, but it was the era of the mod and the rocker. And my dad was a mod and had a scooter with the flag on the back, and through that that's where he met my mum at a young age. So at 17 they'd met and really were high school sweethearts, I suppose, for that, and had been together since. They then got married. I was born when my father was 22, and then 4 years later my brother Joshua came along. And for me, my dad was 7, I was 7 when my dad was killed. But even though I was very young, I have a lot of memories that I've clung on to of my dad. He was somebody that absolutely loved being around people, and that's probably why he moved into the job that he had as a police officer. I remember distinctly his love and passion for music. From morning to night, there was always music in our house. My dad had a vast collection of LPs, and really an eclectic taste in music for all genres. And I distinctly remember that growing up, and got to celebrate in that with him, from dancing about the living room, dancing on my father's feet, and a very distinct memories of that. And maybe you can attest to that from your father's growing up as well, or a family member in your house that loved music. He liked to fish. I have a good memory as well of him with me out fishing, and him standing catching 2 fish, and I actually have a photograph of that in the house. And he really was dedicated to his family and his friends, and really took an interest in us growing up, always being there for us. Fond memories of my dad reading me bedtime stories at night and trying to pronounce the names in some of the novels, and me as a kid really taking a fit of laughter because of his attempt to pronounce that, and of good happy memories of him growing up. Despite his job, I always feel that he was there for me, and I really looked up to him and idolised him as my hero. When my dad was 30, then on the 16th of June 1997, he wasn't due to be working that day, but had taken on a shift and was called in to work early. I was getting ready to go to school, and I remember walking down the stairs and shouting up to my daddy, "See you later, I love you." My mum took me out to school. My dad was late for work, but again, his passion for music came through. Even though he was late, he had to. My mum tells me that he had to have the music on. At that stage, it was the tape player in the car with what he wanted to listen to on his way to work. And then he arrived into work and was out on foot patrol in a town called Lurgan, which is about 20 minutes from here. It was a beautiful summer's day. Him and his colleague John Graham had set off on foot patrol. They'd walked through Lurgan town and were, interfacing with a lot of the public. They'd stopped for a coffee and were walking back through Lurgan Park, very close to Lurgan Police Station, only about 200 yards, when 2 terrorists came up behind them, dressed in women's wigs, and shot them dead at point blank range. I understand my dad was a reserve constable in the police, so I understand if he wanted, he could have been assigned to security duty within the station, etc., or desk activity, but he decided that he wanted to be out in the community because that's where his passion lay. I was at school at the time. I remember vividly being taken out of school by my granny and my dad's sergeant, and I knew something was wrong, and I kept asking, why am I coming out of school early? What's happened? And I remember my granny saying, well, we're going to go home and see your mum. The house we lived in was situated at the end of our street, so as the car pulled into the street, I saw our house at the bottom, and there was a lot of cars there. Again, thought, this is strange, even at that young age. And then as I got out of the car and got to the house, I could see there was a lot of people upset. The house was full of people outside and inside as well. A lot of people upset, and there seemed to be a lot of hustle and bustle in around that, and a lot of activity. And then I was taken into the living room, where there was really a sense of stillness and hurt. And I remember distinctly those 2 different types of feelings, from initially arriving in a state of panic and seeing, a lot of people about and activity, to going into a room of silence with my mum, who was very upset. And she sat me down on her knee and said to me, I need to have a chat with you, and it's to do with your father. And I had said, well, what's wrong? What hospital is he in? And then she said to me, no, your daddy's dead. So at age 7, that was very hard. I screamed, was very upset, couldn't understand why anybody would want to do this to my father. The terrorists that did that, they targeted my dad simply because of the uniform that he wore, a green uniform. They knew nothing about this person that I knew, that was full of love, that, really was devoted to his family. But because simply of the clothes he wore, he was a target that day. That's what they defined him as. And that's why he was targeted. So obviously that was very hard growing up. My dad was 30 when he was murdered. My mum was 30 when she was widowed. She was left with 2 children, aged 7 and 3. And, I really just want to share with you how amazing I think my mum is in all of this, because not only was she trying to deal with her own grief, she was trying to step into a pair of empty shoes that were left in our house for my brother and I, and do two roles, which she really, really did well. And I've a lot of love for my mum for what, you know, not only the pain and hurt that she was having to deal with, but also, you know, to capture that for us as well. Fast forward in my life a few years then, so I became a father when I was 30. I now have two boys, similar to my own dad. And really, yes, you know, when I was growing up, obviously this was very impactful to me. The absence was acutely felt at every family event or, you know, life event that you go through. Really, when I turned 30 then, that was a big struggle for me, from the point of view that was also when the age my father was killed. It was the age that I had my first child, and then I dealt with grief in a different way, and as has been expressed, you know, it's not something that is linear, and it really impacted me when I was 30, more so from the point of view that I was conscious that from the day and hour that my son was born, he was disadvantaged because he didn't have his granda, and similarly for my youngest son as well. You know, that's been the story of their lives. So although this happened to my father on the 16th of June 1997, in 2019 and also in 2022, that's the reality for the generation that are born now. They only know my father through a photograph. They will come with me to my father's grave and give an update to him there, and that for me is the hardest thing. Not only am I dealing with this myself, but also my kids are missing out on their granda and the love that they would have felt for him. So that's why for me these issues are really important that we deal with in a positive manner for the future, because what we talk about legacy, you know, we've had a lot of debate in political arenas and also in the media on legacy, but what's the legacy that we take from today? What's the legacy that we leave the children of the next generation? To me, that is very important, because I want them to have a legacy of peace and of justice and of truth as they get older and they move forward, so that they can take pride in what has been left for them. And really that has led me then to work with SEFF in a volunteering capacity, and then also to seek out other children that have been bereaved within the police family as well, to share our experiences and network, and also to try and make something really positive come out of this. So that's my hope. Thank you for that, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you today.
We now have approximately 15 minutes, Kenny.
We can stretch it to about 25.
Okay. If anyone, and I'm sure there will be questions or comments that you wish to make in relation to anything that you've heard or to any of our speakers. So the floor is open to you now.
Hello. I don't really usually need a microphone, to be fair, but firstly, thanks very much to all of you. Really powerful stories, some of which I've heard before and some not. I suppose the thing that came across when listening was obviously a lot, you know, every story is unique, but throughout the stories there was some commonality in experiences and feelings, and I suppose the question might be a slightly personal one, but in listening to the other stories as you sat there, did you identify? Do you identify with those stories, with the things you could take from those stories? And again, if there was anything, sorry, I should have said at the start. Niall, UK Government Northern Ireland Office. So from what you've been saying, if there was anything that for either UK government or US government, that you as victims and survivors would say this was the one thing we would have liked from the off, or would like to see now, what would that be?
Is this on? Yeah, okay. So firstly, to touch upon, do you identify with each other? Absolutely. And I think we were mentioning this briefly at breakfast, is I had only met the others yesterday evening, and meeting other victims of terrorism in the past, there's very quickly an understanding there where you don't have to explain yourself, because although your stories might slightly differ, you've walked the same walk. So there's just a shared understanding there already that you don't even really have to talk about it if you don't want to. As for what would have been, I don't know if I would say what would have been nice from my government. A lot of the support we got was from private organizations and nonprofits, not so much from the government. The New York City Fire Department for the first responder families was particularly helpful in counseling resources. Even still, our family utilizes the counseling resources through the fire department. The 9/11 community is very large, and resources are kind of unevenly distributed, and so civilian families versus first responder families versus police, resources vary, compensation varies, it gets a bit, even amongst survivors as well. There have been some amazing organizations that helped us, especially as a kid. I mean, they even just sent us to summer camp, which for a little kid that just had your entire life ripped apart, the ability to meet other children and like go swimming and just do silly childhood things is so important. Not only that, but it connects you with other kids that they just get it. I mean, our parents literally died together. And so the issue we're facing now with our government, I know it's a bit of a different situation to here, is that they have, I have to be careful the way I phrase this, they have impeded our fight for justice at almost every turn. So the families have had to kind of relive the trauma over and over and over, fighting. We're still in the midst of all of our court cases, almost 25 years on. We do have law firms and stuff for that, but a lot of the bills and things that have been passed, a lot of the healthcare acts for first responders that are now all dying from cancer, that's been us passing that. That's not coming. Obviously, there's people in the government that are sympathetic to our cause, helping us do that along, but it's literally created an entire job in itself of having to fight and advocate for ourselves. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but if there's a way that from a government level you can support the nonprofit organizations that are doing that at the lowest level down possible, then like it does make all the difference for sure.
Thank you very much for coming today as well. It's great to have government representation. From my personal experience, I think that quite often we think the solutions need to be provided. Actually, it's much better from a survivor's perspective to be done with, not done to, and being part of the solution. One of the biggest healing, I went through some therapy and all the rest, and the thing that helped me the most was being in a room with other survivors, because they shared their experiences. And for me, the biggest thing was forgiving. Being kind to myself was the hardest thing. I had a lot of survivor's guilt when you looked at the people who were killed in my attack. Incredible individuals doing such amazing things at 24 years old, and you think, why did I survive and they didn't? And a lot of unhelpful thoughts that creep in, survivor's guilt, suicide thoughts, a whole lot of difficult things. My memory loss was a big issue for me. But then meeting other survivors who were at the Oklahoma bombing, at Boston bombing, and seeing that actually that memory loss and struggling with things was quite normal, and it may come back, it may not, but actually being kind to myself was the easiest thing. And what emergency services have, as part of their services is something called a collective debrief. And I've learned this through my episode. So in a prison setting, if there's a serious incident, or the police, or even in hospitals, if there's a serious incident, they have something called a collective debrief. And what that does is it allows you to fill the pieces, the missing pieces of the puzzle in your brain to understand what happened. We don't have anything like that for victims. And victims in recovering are going through the same thing, trying to make sense of the senseless. And if we can facilitate that, it doesn't have to be done for them, but facilitate rooms where they can meet in a safe space, they can come together. And Manchester Arena did this naturally through their choir, where the young people formed a choir, and that was some of the most healing things. So enabling the communities to help themselves is probably one of the most powerful things I think that those in government could do. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, I can identify with all the speakers in many aspects. But I'd just like to say, as a member of SEFF, SEFF has been the only organisation that I have felt comfortable in, because, to be honest with you, there are victims and survivors organisations out there. And because I didn't, or my family don't fit into a Republican role or other, we wouldn't be welcome within those organisations. So there are organisations out there that innocent victims and survivors don't fit into, but thankfully SEFF, we are welcome there, and for that I thank you. Just want to have this opportunity to speak to yourself. The victim's pension, it's totally flawed. How can my brother be denied that pension? Yet he has went through equally what I've went through. He was in the house when my father was shot and my mother was shot at. Even if mere fact now that my mother's in a nursing home, the whole process has been made very, very difficult for victims and survivors. To actually relive on a form everything you have experienced is extremely traumatic. I mean, to put victims and survivors through that, when a simple computer can draw up, if you have the date and name, etc., of the atrocity, why then are we put through? I mean, I'm sure everybody's form on this table put together will be the package that you're sent out, and to have to go through that is absolutely disgraceful. And I mean, I just really can't say anything bad enough about the process of the treatment that we receive. And if it wasn't for the like of SEFF, you know, to guide us through that and get us counselling after filling out a form, like seriously, it's absolutely disgraceful that we have to endure that when literally a computer can call up that we're telling the truth.
Thanks for your question. And to answer the first part, absolutely. There's so much in the stories there that I can identify with. And, you know, as Juliette says, you know, you're in a room with people and people just get it. In terms of the rephrase the question, like advices for government, etc., you know, from my perspective, it would be to take the politics out of it, in a sense. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but what I mean by that is stand for what's right in terms of truth and for justice, and stand steadfast to that. In the absence of that, my own personal view is that I feel that when we look at these issues at the minute, they're boxed into that period of the so-called Troubles from a defined period of time after 1998. That was it over. It's not. These are issues that are still, you know, present and relevant today. And in terms of standing for the truth and justice, in the absence of not doing so, I feel as a young person at the moment, there's counter narratives that are running into society and educating the young at the moment. I feel there's a gap in education around these issues. And really, for me, it comes down to the truth being that the bottom line is there was people that upheld the rule of justice and those that didn't. And that's what we need to share as the message for in terms of the educational piece, and take all of the romanticisation and glorification out of it. But in order to do that, we need government support. We need government to put victims at the heart of the process and actually involve them in working groups, etc., in order to achieve that.
My turn. Thank you. Very interesting that a political man show interest in victims. Thank you very much. Thank you, really, thank you. I think there is a red line that we all agree that can't be crossed. It's not possible to kill someone to get political targets. It's not acceptable. And in Spain, there is still a party that supports the terrorist group that thinks that kill someone is acceptable. And we suffer a lot, the victims. So when I'm here and I heard the other victims, I agree absolutely with them. So thank you very much.
Is this on? Yeah. On? Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Chris Miller, Detective Superintendent, Legacy Investigation Branch. I have had the distinct privilege to meet victims and survivors over the years, and I'm always struck by the resilience and the determination and the good grace, I must say. So thank you for sharing your stories with us here today. Louie sort of touched on a little bit of it there. So it's with all social media and digital romanticising and revisionist sort of that's going on at the moment within our country. What are we doing around the education side of things? That's, as you mentioned, the big gap for me. I'm sitting here today and I wish I brought my children. Okay. I think it's powerful. It needs to be told, needs to be heard. And as far as I'm aware, my daughter's 17, my son's 12. The Troubles is not on the curriculum, or if it is, it's very lightly glossed over, and it's black and white, and this is what happened in history. This date happened, and this happened. You know, this is what our young people need to hear. I was extremely saddened recently to read an article where the new generation, the younger ones, as Louie said there, who don't know about the mods and the rockers, they feel that they have missed out on not growing up in the Troubles. Wow. That struck me, really, really struck me. How anybody could feel, knowing what we know, what we hear, that they missed out in some way. And that's, as you say, Louie, the gap is in the education piece there. And the question really is, probably goes more Kenny and Niall down there, what is being done around that? So, thank you.
Hello, my name's Nuala. I'm the widow of a murdered RUCGC officer. Just thank you to the people who have been brave enough to speak today. I particularly indicate Inigo and Darryl, who both say that it's in the education system both in Spain and South Africa. I have long asked to go into schools, as Holocaust survivors have done, just to tell the story, so that the poison doesn't infiltrate down into other generations. People need to know. I'm not saying we go in without some direction, but it's something that's very much lacking, as this young man has said, in the education system. And Louie, well, it's just like what happened in my house. And Oliver, I feel that he painted a bleak but true picture of the aftermath in a victim's house. It's like he was in my home when it happened. I've never heard that from anyone before. You know, you're left with your doctor and prescriptions. So the government need to put this on the curriculum for our sake. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Juliette. I would just like to ask the panel, what they believe is the most misunderstood area of emotions or anything that you've gone through, people who have been traumatised by terrorism, the areas that are most misunderstood by those who have not been traumatised by terrorism. What are the assumptions? Where are the biggest difficulties for you when people make assumptions? Where are those gaps and how do we fill them?
I'll go first. My own perspective on it is that it's something in the past, that this happened long ago. And a part of me can understand why people say that, but without having gone through it. And I think, you know, we talked about the fact that we all just get it because we're all still living it. And, you know, it takes different forms. For me, for example, it was whenever my 2 children came along, I really, really grieved in a different sense. It was a new form of grief. And, you know, at that stage, you know, my father had been murdered 22, 23 years, but it hit me in an entirely new way. And I think there's a perception, and the thing that frustrates me most is that it's in the past when it's not. You know, these are issues that I believe are transgenerational in terms of young people coming up now. And to me, if we really approached it with that angle, then we would see a difference in policy, we would see a difference in outlook, etc. So that's my take on that question.
Well, I work full time and I love my job, etc., etc. And I face many challenges in life, and yeah, there is the strong aspect to it. But there's many days, and people don't see that, and they'll say to me, you know, how do you do it? And I just say, I just get up and get on. But there are days that I could be driving along the road. There's days that I could be at work. I can't tell you when it's going to happen. I can't bring it on. But I am overpowered by a dreadful sense of smell. And the smell just takes over me. And it feels like it lasts for ages, when in hindsight I know it only lasts for a couple of minutes. And when this comes over me, it's just as if it's stuck here in my nose. And that smell is just the smell of me sitting with my father. And while that happens, and I've seen it happen in the Sainsbury's when I'm going along looking, buying stuff, I take the shakes in my hands, my arms, my legs, my heart starts racing. The last one actually happened last Monday. It mightn't happen for another 6 months. It could happen today. I don't know when it's going to happen. And I don't know why it happens so irrationally, or whatever the word is. But those are the things that I live with. And I'm sure that there's many here live with similar experiences. And those are the things that maybe like others that are not impacted like we are don't see. They just see us getting on with our lives, building our homes, you know, making plans for our families. But behind the scenes, it's those wee things, but believe me, they kill you. They wreck my day when that happens. My world is thrown all over the place. But I have to come out of the store if I'm at work and carry on with the day. Anybody else?
I'll be very brief. I think I learned a lot about this as well, because I grew up with the boys don't cry and we need to stiff up a lip. And I think we actually need a cultural shift for trauma, and understanding that we as humans actually need to process our grief. And I think you gave a great example of the stiff upper lip and people trying to ignore it. I think in terms of trauma, and that looks different for everyone, is what I've learned and seen.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any last question?
This is working. Hello, I'm Aileen Quinton, and my mother was one of those murdered in the Puppy Day massacre in '87. And I just a couple of points I'd like to make. First of all, to elaborate and reinforce what you're saying about the importance of mutual help amongst victims. Because of the nature of the bomb, we got a lot of attention from VIPs, which probably others maybe didn't have. But actually, there was an element of that I mean, I'm sure it was genuine, that the concern, but there was a certain element of being a bit of a performing poodle. But actually, one of the best and most important things about that celebrity attention people came wasn't actually seeing the VIP, it was our chance to talk with each other. And I think that is just something that should be much more focused on when anybody's responding to, whether it's a natural disaster or a man-made one with terrorism. It is actually the mutual support, and I think that is much more important, much earlier than counselling. And there was an element that I felt amongst some of the kind of the professional ones that we can't let these victims help each other, because then what will we do? It's like, don't forget us, there's a role for us too. And it is just, as I said, and I remember one report, and it was actually, oh God love her, God rest her, the Queen Mother that came to open something in Fermanagh, and she wanted to meet the victims. And I just remember a write-up of somebody at the end when it was finished, unnoticed by lots of people, a little group of the victims were all congregated together and talking, and I just thought, somebody got it. It happened to be a reporter. It would be much better if the powers that be got it, and that was something that was on tap as soon as something happened, allowing people the opportunity to talk with and help each other. And the other point I would like to reiterate, Denise's point about the process for the pension. And it's almost like we've got a process through that. We've got compensation for somebody who's got a broken leg, but in the process of trying to get compensation, we just make sure that the other one's broken as well. It's actually the impact of that process. And I'd also like to challenge the notion about what are the assumptions that the pension is based on. My other hat from victims awareness is on neurodivergence. And I remember speaking through when I got my diagnosis with Gordon Turnbull, who's a world expert on PTSD. He was in charge of the RAF programme that the hostages went through. And he says, the current theory is that you process a trauma, and I'm sure people that are involved in this hear that phrase about processing the trauma. And neurological differences are about how the brain, differences in how the brain processes. And he says it's thought that one side of your brain runs the video of your trauma and the other side of your brain edits it. So you have to go through quite a few processes, procedures of this videoing and processing to get through your trauma. But if you've got a condition that impacts on the way your brain is connected and therefore impacts on how that would happen, how are you ensuring that your solutions, both in terms of the response and psychological response you give people, is adequate? Because in most cases I feel it's tailored to the majority of people. But also, how can you make an assumption? I'm not getting at you personally. How can one make the assumption that a neurotypical person who witnessed whatever the atrocity is suffers more than a neurodivergent person who doesn't? Because that is one of the things that is meant, within the thing that you have to be a witness. It is a whole lot of assumptions about how people deal with a trauma and how they respond to it and how they can recover from it. Actually, some of those assumptions may be too simplistic. I'm saying maybe they are too simplistic, but thank you.
Can I thank all of the panel for telling their story? And it's important that the story is told. And it's same right across the board. It doesn't matter whether it's in Spain or whether it's in the US or whether it's Northern Ireland. We are all collectively in the same boat, because my dad was murdered. He was a part-time member of the Ulster Defence Regiment, and he also served in the Customs and Excise. And just a couple of points. And Gail, first of all, thank you for a victim doesn't do anything. Not a person who shoots or plants a bomb, and that's the definition of a victim, which we haven't got here in Northern Ireland. Secondly, all of the panel have said that terrorists, accountability, truth and justice right across the board. And we have combatants here. Terrorists have been changed to combatants, and a war. This was not a war the same as it was not a war in Spain. These were terrorists from both sides. And I also want to just thank Darryl. He said victims draw strength and want to change things for good. Too many times victims like ourselves are told to go away, keep quiet, and as Juliette mentioned there, the government seems to be against us in truth and accountability and in some form help those who are the most needy in society. And just the question that I want to ask the panellists, and it's to do with Northern Ireland. How can we ensure that the narrative of the Troubles are not rewritten and that our children, this gentleman here spoke about the young people, how our children and grandchildren are not taught a skewed and biased history of the Troubles?
Paul, the question you asked is an important one. Perhaps there will be time in the afternoon for us to consider that. But for now, I would just like Inigo to have the last comment before we break for lunch.
Yes, you talk about that victim needs to help us each other. And I have a very short story. I met a family of another region of Spain that her father was killed by ETA, and he was a policeman. And the man, the children, was, as me, a man, he was the oldest of the children, and he couldn't speak about what happened. I meet him and talk to him, and now he is better than he was. Thank you.
On your behalf, can I thank our panel? Really inspirational discussion. I'm sure you have been as impacted with it as I have been, but we now have to break for lunch, and the second part of our session this afternoon begins at 1:15.